Hello, welcome everyone. It's my great pleasure to speak with you today about the future of intelligence. And it's an important topic to me for several reasons. One being, I think that the notion of autonomy, which is what intelligence delivers, is really at the heart of the digital economy, and it will make our industry value chains much more fair and much more efficient. Secondly, and more immediately, if you think about the pandemic, the way companies were able to use information to help them get through the worst of the circumstances, not just from a business perspective, but in their ability to contribute to the social good, was evidence of the potential of the future of intelligence. And then, lastly, and perhaps a bit selfishly, I did my graduate work in artificial intelligence, so back in the 1980s, and thought perhaps I wasted all that money. So it's good for me to see these concepts come back and being put to use. So on the next slide, we talk a bit about, I'll give you a bit of my prepared comments today. First, we'll define the future of intelligence. We'll look at some of the current state and approaches, try to give you a sense of what the investment priorities are, and leave you with some next steps. So on the next slide, we show you, this is a survey we did prior to the pandemic, where we talked to nearly 100 CEOs and asked them what their board level priorities were for the digital economy. And you can see they align pretty well with the future of concepts that we've been sharing with you at this event. But I would draw your attention to the second one down, which is the intelligent organization. Nearly 80% of the CEOs said that this topic was either significantly more important or more important in the future. So, with that in mind, let's drill into what we mean by the intelligent organization on the next slide. So we define the intelligent organization as combining the capacity to learn with the ability to synthesize information and to do that at scale. So let me step back for a moment because I'll give you a little inside look of how the research is developed. When we first sat down to talk about this concept after we had the CEO data, someone on the team started the meeting with the definition of intelligence, and the word intelligence actually has two meanings. One is your capacity to learn, which is if you have ever taken an IQ test, that's your individual capacity to learn. So the company's IQ, if you will. And the second definition is the ability to synthesize information for analysis. So that might be competitive intelligence or military intelligence or market intelligence, but that's when we used intelligence in that context. So we said when we look at this for companies investing in the future enterprise, it is both of those. It is their ability to increase their capacity to learn through artificial intelligence and predictive analytics, but built on their ability to synthesize information, all the information we have. But if we can't get that intelligence in those decisions down to the people that can use it in a scalable way, it won't produce the results we seek. And those results are things like faster innovation, higher levels of productivity, and perhaps more importantly, higher levels of customer satisfaction, which I'll come back to in a moment. But on the next slide, let's look at the concept one other way, what we call the economies of intelligence. And we think this ability to create economies of intelligence will create asymmetrical competitive advantage in the digital economy. So let me kind of walk you through our thinking there. So let's take the automotive industry. At its very beginning, you had companies like Ford Motor Company that used and took advantage of mass productions. They had what was called economies of scale, right? They were able to spread costs over a large number of products, standard products that were produced. Move forward in history a little bit, and you have a company like General Motors which was known to have a brand for every budget. So they had Chevrolet all the way up to Cadillac. They had economies of scope where they spread costs over a number of different end products built on standard components, and they created competitive advantage in their era. Now, if we fast forward to the 1980s, you have a company like Toyota who didn't have the capital to compete with European and North American automotive companies. So they employed things like Lean and Six Sigma continuous improvement. They created economies of learning. So if we think about this next generation, let's stay in the automotive industry, it's going to be the economies of intelligence. It might be autonomous vehicles, the company that figures out how to synthesize information and increase the capacity of the car's ability of the car to learn will get to autonomous driving faster. But it's not just the product, it's autonomous business operations. Whoever gets there creates that competitive advantage. So if we sort of boil all that down, we think it borrows from all the previous economies. So I need to scale modern technology so I can instrument, integrate, and provide insight to my organization. And if I do that, I'm going to be able to offer many different experiences to my customers, expand the scope. And through intelligence, I will learn how to do that much more profitably and effectively over time. So economies of intelligence are at the heart of the future of intelligence. And it's the way companies should be thinking about their intelligence strategy. Next slide, please. So I promised to talk a little bit more about the competitive advantages specifically, and we really break it down to three. I think at a high level, you want your companies to target 100% increase in productivity, and especially the productivity of knowledge work. So you take a company like Haier, the Chinese appliance manufacturer, they're looking at taking out 3 to 5 levels of management through a higher ability to synthesize information and make decisions. And it comes down to being able to respond faster. I always talk about Tim Cook, who's the CEO of Apple. Before he became CEO, he ran the Apple supply chain. And he used to hand a book out to all the people that reported to him that was called Competing Against Time. And more, our company's ability to react faster is going to determine how well we do. So we need to shorten those reaction times. It also improves our ability to be successful in our product and service innovation. And most importantly, it can improve customer satisfaction. We estimate a 1.5 times higher net promoter score for those that are able to offer a wider variety of experiences, which you can only do if you've developed the maturity of your intelligence strategy. Next slide. So what are the paths to intelligence? This is an interesting conversation we have with a number of clients. And the way we start the framework for thinking about this is if you think about 2 dimensions, the data within your organization and the processes that you employ, there's an old rule of thumb that says 80% of your data is unorganized and only 20% is organized. And then on the process side, very similar. 80% of your processes are ad hoc, while 20% are highly structured. So if you start to do the math there, if you take 20% times 20%, that's 4% of your landscape is organized data with structured processes. And this is typically what you find in a company's application portfolio. Their ERP, their CRM, their product lifecycle management, all of the apps that a company might run. And what's happening to those applications are the vendors are building intelligence into them. So one of the paths to intelligence is to create your existing apps to become intelligent. If we look at organized data but more ad hoc processes, today we call that business intelligence. These are your data warehouses and your reporting schemes. And those are going to become, and they're already becoming, more predictive and prescriptive. We call that augmented analytics. So that's how those will progress. If you go to the right and you think about your structured processes but unorganized data, these are typically what your company would use for workflow applications, sort of simple approvals, things like that. And we see that migrating to robotic process automation. In fact, we prefer the term intelligent robotic process automation or intelligent process automation. However, all together, this is only 36% of the activity within an organization. And the real opportunity is the 64% in that bottom left-hand corner. This is where the line of business makes their decisions. Today it's very Excel driven, and the data is sort of pulled from a number of different areas. So let's talk about what the line of business would like you to build uh, to create that decision environment, which go to the next slide, please, and we'll have that conversation. So we think about the digital twin. And when you think about this, doesn't matter what the line of business is. Could be marketing, could be sales, could be accounting, could be supply chain. Doesn't matter. From the executive level down to the front lines, we go through very similar types of analysis and decision making. The executives do portfolio analysis for the purpose of allocating resources, right? So, do I have the right set of customers? Do I have the right set of suppliers? Do I have the right set of products? Those are the decisions the executives make, and they do that portfolio analysis, then allocate resources accordingly. The next level down does scenario analysis. What if? Where am I vulnerable? Do I have do I have exposure somewhere? So I do scenario analysis to identify where I'm vulnerable and then mitigate the risks. Next level down in the organization tends to do the planning. So they are doing value analysis to optimize outcomes. What's the best sales and operations plan for my company to optimize my profitability, for example? And then in a situation at the frontline level, I'm doing situational analysis to try to determine what's the next best action to take based on the current situation. Now, when I the decision environment becomes that digital twin where I create a closed loop decision making from portfolio all the way down to situational. And when I connect that next best action decision to my process automation in my digital thread in that process domain, I start to create autonomy because now the processes become self regulating or self healing. The plans eventually become self optimizing, and perhaps even longer term, the strategies become self organizing. So, this is that 64%. This is we're trying to bring the corpus of data needed for those line of business leaders to create these digital twins that model the decisions that drive higher levels, faster decision making, and perhaps even levels of autonomy we've never seen before. So, next slide. So, where are all the investments going? And I've decided to talk about this in three categories. What's the infrastructure proposition? What's the services proposition? And what's the software proposition? In infrastructure for the future of intelligence, especially the artificial intelligence portions of that, there's some very specific requirements of infrastructure, very sometimes tailored workloads where we see companies actually using custom silicon uh, to run the artificial intelligence application. So there's this wide range of investments. But I think there's also a big story for the edge. And you can see if you do one more click forward, you can see these two predictions are both about the edge. We think half of the computer vision and speech recognition models will run on the edge in the future. And the other prediction talks about, um, uh, if you click forward, please. Yeah, thank you. Talks about that the AI workloads itself will be at AI optimized processes are at the edge. So the idea is over time, we're going to bring the intelligence to the data. rather than the proposition of bringing the data to the intelligence. So infrastructure investment strategies to deliver on the future of intelligence has to think about cloud, has to think about very elastic compute, large data set handling, and also the distribution of the intelligence from the cloud to the edge. So if we go to the next topic, which would be services, you can see that there's a whole level of lifecycle services that companies are using to deliver on the promise of the future of intelligence. And if you do a couple of click-throughs for me, I'll show you, we'll talk a little bit about what some of the particular service areas are. So by 2024, we're going to see 3/4 of enterprises are going to invest in employee retraining. So the services firms are going to be very important in helping to augment and build the skills necessary for working with AI adoption. It's going to be a very different proposition. There's probably presentations in this event about the future of work. And a big part of that future of work is giving employees this augmented intelligence so that they can make better decisions. And then the other side of this, in the services side, the other hot area, I think, is making artificial intelligence trustworthy, right? So we're seeing a lot of pushback from governments and other groups where there could be bias, historical bias built into the decision models. So it becomes very important for these decisions to be transparent and explainable. So there's going to be a lot of services consumed by companies looking for help to create the necessary transparency to put forward a trustworthiness in their organization. So if we go to the next topic, which would be services, software, you can see there's all kinds of software categories here, from getting the data right to automating the decisions. And we really think, if you click through for me, please, we really think that at the base of it is the data. And this isn't simply putting all the data in a data lake. This is really about having data catalogs and semantic graphs and knowledge graphs so that I can do the appropriate level of inference at scale. You have to get the data organized, and we're already seeing a lot of money being spent on software tools that help with that. The other part of it is perhaps a bit longer term, is I was talking earlier about embedded intelligence and applications. We see a software market where 25% of the new spend in software will be around buying outcomes as a service. So you won't necessarily buy a sales and operations planning software as an example, but you might buy a software-driven better planning outcome. So that's the other thing to think about. We're already seeing a preference for that in the software industry. So if I can draw a conclusion here and maybe provide some guidance, the first thing to keep in mind is intelligence is everywhere. So sometimes we think about artificial intelligence and advanced analytics, and we're going to buy something separate and put it on top of what I already have. But it's not just in the business logic. It's not just the machine learning. It's also at the data level, where I need to apply intelligence to organize and create those semantic graphs. And it's at the interface. If you think about natural language processing and chatbots, it's at the interface. But the biggest opportunity will be in that 64% of the decision environments that I showed you. It's going to be line of business led, and it's going to do that full closed loop decision making. It's going to be platform centric. I'm going to need a platform of platforms to organize all of it. And it's going to be really dependent on industry specific data management. It's not just enough to know what an accounting data world looks like. You're going to have to know at an industry level, and very deep at an industry level. We think this digital maturity in the future enterprise correlates to having this coordinated strategy and investment roadmap and a platform. Those are all have to be part of the reason why you're investing in the future of intelligence. And perhaps most importantly, in conclusion, winners will learn faster and will be rewarded with sustainable competitive advantage in the digital economy through the future of intelligence. So thank you for your time and attention. I'm Bob Parker. Please feel free to let our host know if you have any questions. Happy to answer those.